So yeah, with that said, then the next question is, okay, do I get greedy and try to take a fifth base and then try to defend that, or do I get aggressive and pump out a mothership, wherever the mothership is coming from, and then make a quicker attack? Honestly, either of these options is viable, but at this stage in the game, you should pretty much have enough money if you haven't been trading armies that much. Basically, the key is this: if you haven't been trading armies too much, you should have the resources to secure a fifth base. And we will see me do that fairly soon. I'm not exactly sure when that happens. I'll speed this up just a little bit. But you should have the opportunity to take a fifth base at this point, and you should be looking to do that. It's not a bad thing to quickly take a fifth, because the natural is getting mined out. The main base is basically mined out. And even if this natural, let's say this wasn't really getting mined out at all, it's actually not a bad idea to take a fifth base anyway, just because the sooner you can mine this out, the better you're off you're going to be. Even if you undersaturate your third and your natural, like if you took half the workers off here, you took half the workers off here, and then you go send them down to the fifth, that's actually a better thing to do, because you can mine this out sooner, which means your safer bases will still have resources that you can mine from. And we see now I'm setting up my fifth base. I've chosen to do the more defensive route, and that's mainly because my mothership was a little bit late. The sooner you can get the mothership out, the better. And honestly, the sole reason for this is because you want it to accumulate energy. You can see I'm starting to move out. I have 100 energy, so I can use a vortex. And we're about to see that engagement that we just saw the very beginning of a second ago. So you saw the vortex go down. My opponent has, let me go to the units tab. My opponent has 8 broodlords here. Typically, how much they spread their broodlords will basically alter from game to game. We see my opponent did do a nice neuroparasite, but it was simply too late to save the broodlords. And at this stage in the game, if I were to have Archons on the field, which you definitely want to try to get Archons when you first move out, I very well may have won the game right here. Simply because I had a great vortex on all of his broodlords. But obviously, I don't have Archons, so we're going to see how this unfolds without them. And by the way, 4 Colossus is pretty much the money number. I would say anywhere from 3 to 4 is great, even if your opponent is just only on Broodlord and Fester. 3 to 4 Colossus is still a good number to have. And because I had no Archons, because it was just not my time, I guess, I couldn't break through his army. And he's going to actually go for a counterattack. Now, before we see this battle unfold, we can see that I'm at max supply right now. And you guys might know to do this. I'm just going to make a point of it anyway. A very obvious time to add on more warp gates. As we can see, I'm at 14 warp gates if you look at my #1 hotkey. A very obvious time to add on warp gates is when you get maxed. When you're at max supply, you're not making units, your money's going to rapidly basically accumulate and store up. So you'll have the money and you'll have the safety net of your units to add on more production. So at that stage in the game, it's a great time to add on more warp gates. But also, if you know you're safe, the sooner you can add on warp gates, the sooner you can add on maybe a 3rd robo, the better. And it's really that simple. So that's all I want to mention, because with those more warp gates, I was able to quickly replenish my stalker count. And really, blink stalkers with a mothership is sort of good enough, to be honest. Obviously, you want Archons. Obviously, Colossus are nice. Immortals are actually better than you might think, because if he overextends with the Infestors, Infestors get 2-shotted by Immortals, and more importantly, they lose a ton of health from 1 Immortal shot, which makes it easier to kill with your other units. So even mixing in a couple Immortals isn't a bad idea. I wouldn't really focus on that at all, though, so just felt like I would point that out. Once again, we can see my Void Ray is up to 8 kills. My Phoenix is primarily used for scouting, but it still has 2 kills of its own. I just want to mention that real quick, just because getting a Stargate out is truly underrated in this matchup, and I really do advise you do so. We can see once again our opponent built Spore Crawlers because of the Stargate. So, as always, as last game, as it happened in the last game, I should say, the Stargate did pay off again. But okay, so that battle underwent. I would strongly advise, as soon as your mothership dies, build another one. Alright? Just select your Nexus with your hotkey, build a mothership, and then get back to the fight. Because if my opponent had a stronger economy, he could have counterattacked me, and I would have had a very difficult time defending it, had I not had this mothership. And another small little side note I want to mention is that building a mothership off of any base that isn't on the front line, which in this game it would be this Nexus and this Nexus, which would sort of be the most exposed, I would advise building a mothership from one of those other safer bases, simply because I built it from here, this Nexus, and yes, it joined my army faster than, say, one of the other Nexi, but the energy still isn't high enough for me to use a Vortex. So basically my point is, if this Nexus were to get sniped for some reason, and that's where you're building your mothership, you may very well just outright lose the game because of that. So that's just sort of what I want to mention. Building it from the other Nexus is safer, since you're going to need time to accumulate energy anyway. So with that said, you have basically your end game composition that you want as Protoss. You got your Archons, your Blink Stalkers, your Colossus, even a couple High Templar. I do advise doing this because you can feedback Infestors if you research Storm, which we see I have Storm on the way. You can storm groups of Broodlords or Infestors or whatever you want to storm. Go ahead and do it. The main reason you leave a couple High Templars unmorphed into an Archon is for feedback, though. So if you see Infestors running up to the front lines to Fungal Growth or Neuroparasite, go ahead and feedback, because that is your best bet. Now I'm going to speed this game along a little bit. We can see I've reached my end game composition. I have a ridiculous Swiss bank account, much like Mitt Romney. So I'm in a comfortable position. I'm on 5 bases, my opponent's on 5 bases, and at this point in the game, you want to be thinking about 2 things. Obviously, A, how do you attack? Because the main thing standing in your way between winning and basically having the game prolonged are the mass amount of spine crawlers that you will almost always see your opponent go for in this matchup at this stage in the game. And then the other question is, do I take a 6th base? Now, on this particular map, and on many maps, it's going to be difficult to take a 6th base, and that's just simply because of the map layout. Now, on this particular map, this would naturally be your 6th base, but I do want to mention, for instance, if you saw a hatchery coming up right here, what would your first move be? It would be go kill it, because he can't get defenses up, he can't defend that as easily as, say, this base over here. Excuse me, I'm burping just a little bit. So that's why it's hard to secure one of these bases, but at the same time, at some point in the game, if a game were to go on long enough, that would be the focal point, and that would be the basically the key to the game at that stage in the game. And now we see some Corruptors coming around. They're just going to try to snipe my mothership, but I do have the something. I saw these coming somehow. But regardless, my army is stationed here. And one thing you want to consider, let's say he didn't have these defenses here. One thing you want to consider is, okay, I can loop around here to here to here and kill this hatchery. But then what does that allow my opponent to do? And basically, you're maxed out, you can't really produce any units. And by the way, one thing I want to mention is, you did see some Stalkers come back here a few minutes ago. And the reason I did that was actually just to free up some supply. I want to see my units tab. Okay, so 73 probes isn't too many, so that's not bad. But basically, I want to free up some supply so I can get some Archons on the field, and that is important to do. As I said before, if you have your mothership with a Vortex, you sort of need your Archons to fully utilize and fully, take advantage of the Vortex. So you can do the Archon toilet, obviously. So yeah, basically, if you go into attack one of these side bases, you got to be aware of a counterattack, even if it's just a few units, and those can be pretty difficult to hold off because of the fact that you can't make any more units because you're maxed out. with that said, we're about to see this fight underway in a second. The first thing you want to try to do is if you see your opponent moving out towards you, you want to try to feed back the infestors before the battle truly starts. Now, I did make a pretty bad micro mistake. His corruptors came from the flank, and they did kill my mothership, which is pretty bad. If you lose your mothership before the fight basically gets underway, you do want to try to retreat because you just can't engage this type of army without it. You might take a few losses here and there, but it's just something that you have to do, more or less anyway. And so he knows he's killing mothership. He didn't really lose much, so he's going to go ahead and push across the map, push across the fields. He's not maxed out though, which is a little surprising, but I'm guessing he will be shortly. But now he's going to go ahead and engage my 4th base. His corruptors are leading the way. And here comes the blink forward. Now basically, your only answer to killing the broodlords at this point is blink stalkers, but of course if you blink in, they fungal growth. So it's sort of a difficult fight to really win without a mothership. And because of that, you're about to see an interesting response. And I don't know exactly how this worked out. So in the resources lost, we see he has lost 21,000 and I have lost 12,000. And let's just sort of keep that in mind as I do this counterattack. And so I'm moving into a spine pillar wall. This is something that you're going to have to kill eventually, so the fact that I'm running into it right now isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you see him get lazy with his infestor micro, pick them off as best you can. But if you ever get caught in this sort of situation, you just want to stay away from the broodlords. They move very slowly at a move speed of 1.14. Stalkers move almost double that speed, actually move more than double that speed. So what he's going to probably be doing is trying to slow you down with fungal growths. So once again, just pick those off if you can. And your goal right now is just to kill off any tech or hatcheries that you can, but also to avoid engaging where his broodlords can fight. And we saw in the resources lost, I was ahead by like 8,000. Now I'm ahead by like 5,000. So that did not go in my favor.